NPAC, Delegate Scramble, VTR 6772, Air 6772.
I can't believe we've won the whole thing.
Had it been predicted a few short months ago that Senator George McGovern would score resounding primary victories over Senator Hubert Humphrey in New Jersey, New Mexico, South Dakota, and the critical winner-take-all event in California, that forecast would have been met with widespread disbelief. But yesterday, George McGovern did win the whole thing, clearly establishing himself as the Democratic front-runner. To date, Senator McGovern has won 899.5 delegates, 609.5 short of the 1,509 he'll need to win the Democratic presidential nomination on the first ballot at the Democratic Convention in Miami. Tonight, a look at how and where that critical block of delegate votes may be found.
Tonight, the Delegate Scramble, with Impact senior correspondents Sandra Vanocur and Robert MacNeil.
Good evening. Senator George McGovern won 4 primary contests yesterday, adding to his growing total of Democratic Convention delegates. Senator Humphrey's losses, however, have not ended his bid for the nomination. This morning in Houston, he told a group of Democratic governors meeting there that he would continue his candidacy right through to Miami.
Early last evening, with only a fragment of the vote in, McGovern led in California by as much as 16 percentage points. Through the night, as more votes were counted, the lead dwindled. Now, with 99% of the total precincts reporting, McGovern has 1,363,095 votes. That's about 45% of the total. Humphrey has 1,170,873 votes, and 40%. McGovern has all of California's 271 convention votes. One pre-election poll released over a week ago showed McGovern with a lead of 20 percentage points. One governor at that Houston meeting said Humphrey's loss should be considered a moral victory because he didn't lose by the 20% margin. Democratic Party rules, however, don't provide for the awarding of convention votes to moral victors. For the Republicans, President Nixon won all 96 California delegates, along with 90% of the popular vote. Representative John Ashbrook, the president's challenger from the right, got 10%. In New Jersey, McGovern won a majority of that state's 109-member delegation. The latest delegate count shows him with 68 New Jersey delegates, and it will probably go higher. Humphrey picked up 11. New Jersey was a bit of a surprise. It was thought the heavily industrialized state might show up more strongly for Humphrey. McGovern was expected to be strong there, but his showing was even better than expected.
New Mexico also held a couple of surprises. The primary had shaped up as a battle for the 18 delegates between McGovern and Humphrey. But the strong second-place finisher was not Humphrey, but George Wallace, who picked up 8 delegates, with McGovern getting 10. Only McGovern had campaigned in the state, making a last-minute side trip from California. He did well in the urban areas, while Wallace was scoring heavily in the rural areas. Humphrey was shut out in the delegate vote division. New Mexico divides all of its convention votes between the top 2 finishers in the popular vote. McGovern had 34%, Wallace 29%, and Humphrey 26%. The other surprise came in the Republican race. Congressman Paul McCluskey won his lone convention delegate there. President Nixon piled up 90% of the vote and picked up an additional 13 delegates. South Dakota was easy for all concerned. McGovern was unopposed and won 17 delegates, and Mr. Nixon won all 14 delegates in the Republican primary. All eyes and energies are now trained on the first ballot at Miami.
That first ballot victory is at the very core of the McGovern campaign strategy. McGovern's forces now think they can make it, and they're pulling out all stops and calling in all favors in their efforts to win it on the first go-round. The secondary thrust of that effort is to keep the convention from going through 2 or more additional roll calls. McGovern strategists think they have solid strength for 2 more ballots. There's a large group of delegates, 80 by their calculations, who are committed elsewhere on the first ballot, but who'll switch to McGovern on the second. Bringing more delegates into the fold while keeping others from straying is the simple truth of it all. With each succeeding ballot, the pressure on delegates becomes more staggering. The floor operations will have McGovern's people trying to keep their own forces in line while trying to break loose some of Humphrey's people. The convention floor will be alive with rumors calculated to switch the allegiance of all but the most diehard of the delegates. And after a third reading of the roll, without a candidate achieving the winning margin, delegations begin to get restless and may start to look elsewhere for a compromise candidate. McGovern wants to smother any signs of erosion among his delegates because he knows the multi-ballot convention can be treacherous. Witness the Republican convention in 1860. Seward was generally considered to have the nomination wrapped up, but on the night of the balloting, the supporters of honest Abe Lincoln counterfeited tickets to the hall, packed the gallery, and kept out the Seward backers. Lincoln won on the third ballot. The difficulties inherent in multi-ballot conventions go beyond the final gavel. In 1884, at the Republican convention, James G. Blaine, known as the Plumed Knight, was the popular favorite, although he was tainted by a strong identification with machine and moneyed interests. The heavily divided reform-minded opposition was unable to unite behind another candidate, yielding the nomination to Blaine only after the 5th ballot. Damage to the Republicans was complete when Grover Cleveland went on to win the election for the Democrats. The 1912 Republican convention was anything but conventional. William Howard Taft had party backing. Teddy Roosevelt challenged 200 of his delegates. Detectives were hired to prevent bribing of the delegates, and finally barbed wire was strung round the rostrum. Taft got the nomination, with Teddy Roosevelt charging off to form the Bull Moose Party. When the Democrats got their turn, it took them 46 ballots to nominate Woodrow Wilson, with Wilson slowly gaining a few votes at a time over the long droning of the roll calls. Wilson's victory came not so much from a wave of popular feeling on the convention floor as from the doggedness of his floor operation in not letting his delegates cave in to the other strong candidates. Patience was also the guiding principle in the Republican convention of 1920, when Warren G. Harding had made a poor showing in the primaries and was considered 4th among the frontrunners. Harding's campaign manager told a reporter, "I don't expect Senator Harding to be nominated on the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd ballots, but I think we can afford to take chances that about 11 minutes after 2, Friday morning of the convention, when 15 or 20 weary men are sitting around a table, someone will say, 'Who will we nominate?' At that decisive time, the friends of Harding will suggest him, and we can well afford to abide by the result." And that is just the way it happened. The deadlock convention reached its apex in 1924, when Al Smith and William Gibbs McAdoo fought to a draw over 100 ballots. On the 103rd ballot, the convention turned to John W. Davis, who eventually lost to Calvin Coolidge.
And so, what are the lessons to be learned from history? Well, if you can win the nomination on the first ballot, it's obviously better that you do so. But if you cannot, then you better make sure that your support is strong enough to hold firm through several ballots. While McGovern clearly won the day yesterday, his victory over Senator Hubert Humphrey in the California primary was by a 5% margin. That was much smaller than the 15 to 20% that had been predicted by the pollsters, a figure that apparently the senator never believed. To examine how this narrow victory will affect McGovern's delegate-getting ability, we have with us again tonight Bruce Biasat, the NEA Scripps-Howard syndicated columnist. Bruce, based on the latest developments, Senator McGovern now has 899.5 delegate votes, which is rather impressive, a lead over the 326 pledged to Governor Wallace and the 304 pledged to Senator Humphrey. But of course, he still needs an additional 609.5 delegate votes to win a first ballot victory at the convention. Do you think that McGovern's margin of victory here yesterday is going to have any effect, as some are already saying, on the bandwagon psychology that he has been trying to develop?
I don't think a serious one at all. I think the attention being paid to his 4 victories yesterday, the fact that he now has 9 primary victories, more than anyone else, and will probably soon get a 10th in New York, the huge delegate haul that he collected, all these things argue for strong, continuing momentum which should produce more and more delegates for him and, in my judgment, lead to a first ballot nomination for George McGovern.
We've noted the resistance over in Houston to the McGovern candidacy, and Robin referred to a statement by a governor who claimed that Humphrey had won a moral victory. But isn't the key to understanding what's going to happen at the convention the fact that in many instances a lot of governors and regular party people are not going to be at Miami?
I think that's so. I don't know anyone who has run up a complete tabulation, but I suspect that a lot of governors are simply not going to be there as delegates. They will either be occupying guest chairs or they'll be sitting home watching the thing on television.
Bruce, can we look at where you think these additional delegates are coming from that will give McGovern this first ballot victory that you speak of? Now, you've identified a number of states where you think there are delegates who can break loose. Let's look at Missouri, which I think is your first state. What's the situation there?
Well, Governor Hearns is not one of George McGovern's prime advocates. Of course, he had endorsed Senator Muskie along with the 2 Missouri senators, and he is quite a conservative man. In the conventions in Missouri, the McGovern people won 12 delegates. That leaves 61. Most of these are considered to be in Governor Hearns's pocket. Actually, the McGovern people believe that they can collect another 8 of those. And I spoke to Governor Hearns about that at Houston on Monday, and he said, well, that may be so. He says, I don't know who they are or where they'd come from, but it may very well be true.
So that's 8 more in Missouri. Yeah. Now, moving on to Texas. What's the situation there?
Well, Texas is a very volatile state, and I think perhaps unless you live there, you never really know very much about Texas politics. I certainly do not profess to. I'm taking guidance from those that I hope are expert, and what I have found there is from an original, very strong position. Hubert Humphrey has steadily lost ground since March. In my visit over there at Houston, I found this was continuing, and I found that George McGovern was judged to have about 45 of 130 which they will select, and of the 18 considered now to be in the uncommitted, that he might pick up perhaps 10. I think that the prospect is good because Texas is badly fragmented. There's a strong Wallace element there. He's probably going to get around 40 to 47, something of that sort.
Okay, so you've got him picking up 18 more now. Louisiana is another of the states you think is hopeful.
Well, it's another hard case for George McGovern in some ways. Governor Edwards, who is the newest governor in point of service in the Democratic ranks, is dead set against George McGovern. He, I found out in a call I made just this morning, has said something like this, that if it goes George McGovern in Louisiana, it'll be 43 to 1 in favor of George McGovern, and he'll be the one. Nevertheless, in Louisiana, George McGovern already has 9, and I estimate from talking to people there that he should be able to pick up at least another 6. That would give him 15. And the McGovern people themselves think they have a potential for even more. What has happened there is that blacks and the McGovern forces have worked very well together, and they have if not dominated, been a very strong influence in the conventions that have been held, and they have this potential to build a considerable McGovern presence there.
Okay, so we're up to 24 more for McGovern. Now let's have a look at New York, where there is a primary on June 20th. How do you see things happening in New York?
Well, in talking to Mr. Humphrey's delegate counter the other day in Houston, I learned that he conceded about 210 of New York's 278 to George McGovern. That was what I had given him in my own third delegate count. I now think that the figure is going to be a good deal higher than that, and I would suggest that if things go well for George McGovern in the intervening time, that there's an add-on there, a potential for perhaps another 25 beyond that, which would give him perhaps, well, 270 out of the 278. There are some holdout places in Joe Krangle's area there in Buffalo. There's some resistance, and in certain parts of Brooklyn and the Bronx, there are uncommitted slates. Some of these are going to win. Some of them may chip in with George. Some of them may hold out. But the tendency in New York is to go with the winner very strongly. And if McGovern has, by, let's say, 10 days from now, added perhaps 20 or 30 or 40 delegates in some other places, I'm sure it will be very heavy McGovern in New York.
You said 270 out of 278?
That's I think, just about a top figure.
Now, Illinois.
Well,
What do you see happening there?
Illinois is a very spread out situation. There are, as you know, 62 delegates who are morally but not legally committed to Senator Edmund Muskie. He won them in the primary, and some have been chosen since in a convention. George McGovern has a bare 15. 13 of those he collected in that primary. He was rather soundly trounced. Not much was made of it at the time, but it was the case. This huge remainder of 93 is more or less tied to the famous Mayor Richard J. Daley of Chicago, perhaps 80 of them pretty strongly. If Daley somehow surmounts his difficulties with the Credentials Committee, he might have those to toss around, and perhaps at a crucial moment, being a pragmatic man, might give them to Senator McGovern. The other prospect is, and it's very much current today, it's in the news, on the wires, Senator Muskie's votes are very loose. At least half of that delegation is ready to break on its own at any time, and certain people have said that almost inevitably that half will vote for George McGovern on the first ballot. It's conceivable that Muskie might give them a signal to cast loose, and that almost all of those 62 could go for George McGovern. That would be I'm only figuring here that half, about 30, will go, but it could be considerably more when we get to ballot time.
So that's your minimum from Illinois for McGovern.
30,
30 additional to the 15 that he has.
That's right.
Has there now. Now, from what other, that gives us, 324 additional to what he has at the moment. What other states do you see providing?
Well, without giving the specifics, I ran through the whole map of states, and I found that in Delaware, perhaps West Virginia, Ohio, Iowa, Minnesota, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Idaho, he could pick up perhaps an additional 45. And I find that totaling that all up, that is what we ran off in those 5 critical states. Oh, and I left out Connecticut, where if John Bailey, who is, again, a very pragmatic politician, should decide to toss in, as it's rumored he may do, another 20 would go for George McGovern. There's a modest pickup possible in Pennsylvania. There are 13 at large there. I'm told that about 4 are almost certainly for George. If Muskie made a critical decision to cut loose altogether and free his legally bound delegates, there's a bag of 40 there that are his, and I would suspect that a modest proportion of those, from what I've been told, would also go to McGovern. More of those are bent toward Humphrey.
So what's your overall projection at the moment, based on all these calculations?
Well, I think if you add on what I am going to have in my fourth delegate count to what we had the third time, we started with 971. I see a minimum of another perhaps 400 coming to McGovern right now. That's somewhere in the range of 1,370, let's say. And if we then add, I think this comes to 148, these additional things we've been talking about, I see that at about 1,518, which is obviously 9 more than are needed to be nominated. And so I see this very possible.
You've got it very close indeed. As a matter of fact, the Muskie situation that you referred to, the whole ballgame could be over very quickly if he decided to go a certain way. We've discovered that this very day, Senator Muskie is meeting in Washington with his top advisors to decide exactly what to do, and he's seriously reevaluating his whole position. And we're told that he's been presented with 3 choices: either hang around and wait and see and do nothing, which apparently is the least likely thing for him to do, or seriously try to reassert his candidacy, go out and campaign a bit more, perhaps try and grab up a few delegates in the non-primary states, or the third possibility, simply give up now and throw his support to George McGovern. And he is being urged by various factions to do both of those 2 things. We may know the Muskie's decision in the next day or so, and obviously if he threw his support to McGovern, the whole game could be over right there, couldn't it?
I think so, yes. It's very swift.
It's not just a question of throwing his support, it's a question, well, that's important, but he has people bound to him. They are binding themselves, like Senator Tunney, Warren Hearns last night said on the program that they gave him their support. They will not break off that support until he gives them the release. There's another factor that I think we haven't paid enough attention to, and it's not pleasant to talk about, but it's the Governor Wallace block of delegates. We don't know very much about the governor's physical condition. The signs are that he may not go to Miami. Bruce, can those delegates be held, or can any of them be broken off?
Well, this gets into the very sticky question of the nature of their commitment, and it's a very difficult thing. Some of the delegates who have been elected in various states, pledged by law to Wallace, are saying that they will not vote for him on even the first ballot. Others are saying, and I think these are among those that the McGovern people are counting when they start talking about their second ballot strength, are saying that they will break as quickly as they can thereafter. How this first question is to be resolved, I think, is a very difficult one for the Credentials Committee. What will be the legal position of delegates who were selected really as Wallace delegates? Are they violating state law? Does state law take precedence over party rules? Or, as the National Committee strictures seem to have it, are party rules supreme? And are they free to act upon their conscience when they get there? I'm not sure how that's going to work out. I have a feeling that if Wallace is not treated with full deference in this matter, that it could be a very explosive issue in committees and on the floor of the convention, and that sympathy for Wallace might heighten the emotional content.
And of course, after the convention, if Wallace, as he said, got treated bad by the convention, providing he's physically capable of doing it, it might be the thing that pushes him into a third-party candidacy.
Yes,
Well,
I
do
think so.
challenges then throw into some doubt all of these figures that you've added up?
I don't really think they do, seriously. Interestingly, yesterday when I was flying back from Houston on a press plane with the McGovern party, I had a talk with a prominent McGovern aide, and he said, rather wistfully, I thought, he said, we'd love to win it without any of the challenged delegates. They'd like to win it, in other words, by their measure, clean, so that nobody could question a single delegate that they had won, and so there would be no feeling that they had gained it only by, you might say, kicking up a fuss at the convention.
And the leading symbolic figure in that is Richard
Yes.
Daley, of course,
Yes,
who
of
is
course.
the perhaps most important challenge delegate.
Exactly, yes. They would like to do it, in fact, without Daley's support if they could. That may be a fanciful dream, but they really do talk in those terms at times.
There's another factor today, isn't there, in the news? Hubert Humphrey is reported to have said in Houston that, what actually did he say?
You have to be careful because it's a hard lead on the UPI, and he said, if a man will accept the platform, he'd be acceptable on the ticket in my book. And this was in reference to a question about George Wallace. Then he went on to say, but I think it's highly unrealistic that Hubert Humphrey and George Wallace will be on the same ticket. It's very difficult to generalize sitting here in Los Angeles about what happened in Houston, especially at a governor's conference where everybody's rushing around looking for a lead. But I can't imagine that that's going to do, even suggesting it, is going to do Senator Humphrey any good at all, because there's just nothing that can flow to him from the Wallace faction.
And there is something that could flow away from him.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that is so.
His own credibility with what's left of his constituency on the liberal end of the party.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Bruce, thank you for joining us. I hope you'll be with us in Miami, too. With McGovern's victory here in California, the delegate scramble, which has been in the background until now, really now becomes the name of the game. The primary battles are over, and Hubert Humphrey, however, says he's still in the race. But what kind of an uphill battle does a candidate face when he loses in California? Ironically, perhaps the best answer to that question comes from Senator Humphrey himself. Several days ago, in a lighter moment, the senator discussed just such a situation with us.
I believe that either one of us would come out of there winning it, whoever wins it, looking very good. If I lose it, I want to be honest with you, my staff doesn't like me to say these things, but it would be like getting a good case of the Asian flu in the middle of the winter and trying to go ice skating with a 50-pound pack of cement on your back. Is that a descriptive analysis?
You don't think that case of flu would be fatal if you lost it?
Well, let me tell you, it sure would even tax the strength of a man like Hubert Humphrey.
Next week on A Public Affair, Make Policy, Not Coffee. Sandy takes a look at America's major minority, or minor majority, women, in their quest for an increased role in our political life. For Sandra Vanocur and NPACT, I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
A Public Affair is a production of NPACT, the National Public Affairs Center for Television.